what is the hero of your story gonna say? What is it that people wanna remember you?
Welcome everybody to The Journey, a show that examines the sacrifices and hard work those in the swimming community endure to achieve their goals in and out of the pool. I'm Jeff Commings, and with me today is my co-host, Molly Harmon.
Hi Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing very well, thanks. I am so excited for this first episode.
Me too. We're both swimmers, and we've all been so fascinated of the accomplishments of some of the best athletes throughout history. Sometimes we don't always know what it took to get there, and that's kind of what we aim to do here on the show, is to not only learn from it, but so that other people watching and listening can also learn from it and maybe take something and relate to it.
That's exactly what we want to do. We do understand firsthand how much work it takes to accomplish the goals we set for ourselves. And a lot of the athletes in the world have stories about reaching those dreams that we want to share to the world. And to that end, I would like to introduce our guest today. He is the 2008 silver medalist in the 100 butterfly, the 2009 world champion in the 50 butterfly, and a former world record holder in the 100 butterfly. He's now head coach of King Aquatic Club in Seattle, and it is our great honor and pleasure to welcome Milorad Cavic to the show. Milorad, so good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm really good, and thank you for asking. And you guys keep saying this, the name The Journey, and I'm just thinking that song, don't stop believing. and I think that song, it has a lot to do with the themes of this, this podcast, or this idea, the journey, and believing throughout the whole thing.
Yeah, if you keep believing, a lot of great things happen, and I'm sure that's kind of what you did throughout your whole career. And obviously, everybody knows you for that big race at the Beijing Olympics in 2008, the 100 butterfly, where, as we said, you won the silver medal. And I remember a lot of talk, even before the Olympics, was all about Michael Phelps and Milo Cavic and the 100 butterfly. And then I think the whole world kind of came to a standstill to watch that one race. We all know that race really well. I know it plays over in your head a lot of times, but I would be curious to know, what was your journey in the 24 hours between the semifinals, where you qualified first, to actually stepping up on the blocks for the final?
For those of you that are old enough to kind of remember this, and 12 years has gone by after all, the Olympics, there was a change that year for that Olympics, and the big change was that they would have the finals in the morning, and prelims would be at night. So semis and finals would be in the mornings, and what that required was that all athletes would kind of rearrange their sleep cycles and when they would be ready. So for me, going into the finals, the big change in what it was like was I knew that going up to that race, I would have to wake up extra early that morning, just to physiologically activate myself, just so that I could be my best. I specifically remember that final was set to go off at like 10:15 a.m. And it usually takes you about 3 hours from the moment that you take a cold shower or you take that coffee or whatever it is that you do to wake up. But it usually takes about 3 hours for your body to totally wake up. But that morning, I woke up at 4 a.m. And I'm not sure if it was the anxiety of the race or just me needing to be extra ready. And I think the mindset of that was, we all usually feel much better at night for night finals. Well, what is it that I can do to wake myself up in time to get ready for that race? So I remember waking up that morning, and I think I played one of two films. One was Cool Runnings, and the other one was Without Limits, the movie and life of Stephen Prefontaine, who was actually my philosophical my philosophical inspiration. So I can't remember which one of those it was, but I know that I woke up. I did like 25 jumping jacks as soon as I woke up just to get myself, active. And then I might have taken a shower, and then I came back and just watched a movie, something to kind of build me up. And that's how that day started. So yeah, I can kind of walk you through everything after that, or we can kind of skip to the race. What are you
Well, I
thinking?
want to know, because it was morning finals, and because now that you woke up 6 hours before the race, did that shake up anything about in terms of your preparation once you got to the pool?
So really, really good question. Nowadays at most Olympic villages, and I went to 4 of them, so I can kind of tell you how it was in the beginning in 2000 and later on. But there's usually an Olympic sized pool in the Olympic Village. And what I would usually do after waking up, and what I did after that movie, was I went for a swim, just an activation swim. After which I went and had breakfast, and usually about 2.5 hours before the race, I leave for the pool. When I get to the pool, I like to take my time. 2 hours before the race is just enough time for you to walk around, kind of feel out the energy, see who's sitting where, and I like to take a good 30 minutes of stretch time before I get in the water. So I used to have a minute-to-minute plan all up into my race, and that minute-to-minute plan from beginning to finish usually lasted about an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes. And a lot of it had to do with just getting the quick rub before, just after my warm up. After that rub, because I felt like my muscles were a little broken down for the rub, I jumped back in just to reestablish my feel for the water. And then after that, I would come back and slowly put my race suit on and head over to the call room.
Yeah, and back then you had the full body polyurethane suits, so it's not just like a 5-minute thing of putting on your suit. Those took a while.
It did take a while, and but you learn a lot. Like, I remember one person told me just to like bring a garbage bag or have a garbage bag available, and it still works today. Like, if you're wearing a jammer and you're ever having trouble putting a jammer on, whichever suit it is, get a garbage bag and have it be one that goes all the way up to your knee at least, and then over the garbage bag, pull your suit up, and the suit will slide right over the plastic of the bag right up until the point of your knee where you want it to be. And then it's a little easier. But back then, those suits, they easily took about 25 minutes to put on, and you would get tired. You would.
It's like a race in itself. You have to warm down from putting on your suit.
Almost. I definitely had a couple of people help me just so I can, save whatever, 1% of energy.
I'm really curious, what did you have for breakfast?
Usually for breakfast, when I would race, it was mostly grains, maybe just some eggs. But for me, it was just keeping it real light. I would forego the bacon and anything that may have been heavy, but usually just some orange juice, some cereal with banana. When I say cereal, I mean they have a bunch of oats inside, or some yogurt. I really loved just having some yogurt. And later on, unfortunately, after my career, I discovered parfaits, which was awesome. But yeah, I would always just kind of keep it light. And what's interesting was only a year and a half after that race was the first time that I ever sat down with a nutritionist, and I actually learned what I was supposed to eat all along. So for many, many years, I had no idea what I was putting inside my body, which I recommend to all of you. Meet with our nutritionist, learn a couple of things, and it will change your career, no doubt.
I would imagine even you don't have to be a nutritionist to know it's not a stack of pancakes before the big race.
I think what's important, especially like growing up, you got to keep it fun, and when you go to meets, and especially with kids, telling them not to have pancakes, it's kind of taking the fun out of it. It's just more pressure, eat whatever you normally eat. Your body's used to eating just that. And if it's hopefully not a breakfast burrito, but if it is, then have it. Just stay away from anything heavy, like just red meat. But
Right.
yeah, there's a lot to nutrition.
All right, so let's talk about the race. And one thing I've always been excited and really wanted to ask you is not necessarily second by second of the race, but it's kind of a two-part question. How much were you aware of the crowd noise, and how much were you aware of the 7 other men in the pool, particularly Michael Phelps, during the race?
It's a really, really good question. I think at some point, a lot of swimmers, especially when they become pros, they become philosophers in some way. And for me, I was always a mental game kind of guy. I remember this one quote from Devil's Advocate with Al Pacino and Keanu Reeves, and I think there was one part in that movie where somebody said, "What do you do when the devil smiles at a man?" And I remember this being so important to me because I used it, and the answer is a man smiles back. And for me, I kind of use that as a moment to, is a motivation going into that race, thinking like, here I got to attack, because if I give the competition a moment to, to respond or to strike back, that is where the tables can turn. Going up to that race, Jeff, you're stepping up with the block and you hear everybody, but one thing that you notice is early as the call room is how thick the air gets. And boy, that air, it almost feels syrup compared to air. Like it's just that thick. And when you're breathing it in, like, you feel your lungs expand. And then when you breathe out, you feel it come out. And I think in those moments, sort of like in the movies with some films, you hear your heartbeat. And for me, this was kind of the moment I've been dreaming about for a very, very long time. A lot of us get into swimming, just wanting to have fun. Along the way, you start setting some goals. Well, when these goals started getting pretty serious, I decided I wanted to be Olympic champion someday. And for most people, Jeff, a lot of people don't get a second chance. I knew at that moment that I was in the prime of my career, and that if it was going to happen, that was as good a time as ever. And it's one of those do or die moments. You either do it now or never. And when you're there, in my mind, going back to that quote, what do you do when the devil smiles at a man? I just thought to myself, I'm not going to quit. This is going to be my moment to attack, and it doesn't matter what everyone else is going to do. I know what I'm going to do, and that's all I can control. So, the gravity is great because it's the moment that everybody at that level dreams of. And yeah, at that point, that you've earned the right to be there, and that you're amongst them. And at this point, you think, well, if the pressure has a good chance of breaking some of the athletes in this race, but today it's not going to break me. And I just thought to myself, I got to just attack. So, going into this race, I knew that Michael was the guy to beat. I'm somebody who, even throughout training, if I ever wanted to challenge somebody, I'd call him out. Whether it was one of my training partners, George, or anybody else, to be like, George, let's get up and do this, and in that spirit, whenever I went into this race, I'd either call someone out or I'd focus on that person, and I'd use that to kind of motivate me to get through this moment. Is it going to be me, or is it going to be him? So yeah, it's heavy, but when you're ready, you're ready.
Well, as I said, it's one of those races that everybody can remember, and I'm sure it sticks in your mind. In the aftermath of that race, I mean, you went through all the media, had a lot of interviews and everything like that. But beyond the media, when you're out in public, people see you and said, "Oh, you're the guy who was in that final of the 100 fly." What's the most asked question that people who come up to you ask you, even 12 years later?
They ask who won that race. Like that's really the most commonly asked question, who won that race. And for me in that moment, I mean, I just finished, like, I had no idea who won that race. I mean, I just remembered that I was ahead, and the rest is kind of history. And I think one of the reasons why that race is still talked about in swimming circles today is the controversy that kind of surrounded that race. And it's that controversy where in this country, it's obvious who won. And just about everywhere else, it's different medias in different countries, they broadcast it in a different light. And in retrospect, the question that's always asked was who won that race. And to this day, people still ask, and I think that's one of the mysterious things, and one of the reasons why that race is always gonna kind of stay in a lot of people's memories. Was it was unclear, and there was a lot of dirt that followed that race in its aftermath.
So
Go ahead, Molly.
I just have to ask, like, what were you thinking on that back half? Because you, at the turn, I'm sure you could feel that you were ahead, but like, what were you thinking then? Like, you were gonna win. Like, what were you thinking?
Yeah. So Molly, you're an athlete from what I heard, and at some point you do something enough to where your body just kind of takes over and does its own thing. And for a lot of us, we just kind of go into this cruise control or autopilot, where it's almost as if you're just letting your body do what it does without entirely too much thought. I race my races a lot like most sprinters do. We go out hard, and whatever's left. And that was something that I learned from Stephen Prefontaine. He could never allow himself to hang back and strategize in that sense. I think a lot of athletes, like myself, sprinters at least, they race in the same way. They just go for it. Not all out, but really go for it. And when you turn first at the wall at the 50 and you're coming home, that it's yours to lose. So coming home, it isn't until really the adrenaline's going, but it isn't until, of course, the last 15 to 20 meters when it really starts to hurt. And the way I've always been was I would run myself into the ground so hard that my head would start hurting. The first thing to go are your arms, and then your legs, and then your head starts to hurt. And like you're just, very often, even to this day, you see a lot of athletes in the final meters, they're looking around, they're just like, oh my gosh, like, when is this all gonna come? And it's one of those moments to where that painful moment's gonna come, and how are you gonna deal with it? What's your character like? You've been preparing for this, and when your legs and arms give up, like, what kind of protocols do you have to employ in your stroke? What changes do you have to make to kind of get through it? So it's a combination of adrenaline and in excruciating pain.
Well, that's butterfly anyway. To me at least. All these years later, you're right now, you're the third fastest ever in history in the 100 butterfly.
I would say fourth. Yeah.
You would say fourth. Okay.
I would say fourth because Ian Crocker's 50.4 in 2004 is the fastest 100 fly I think I'd ever seen before Dressel went 49.5, right?
Yes.
Other than that, 50.40 in 2004 in a leg suit. Yeah, that's I'm gonna give him that.
Yes, I agree. That I remember that race. It is still one of the top 10 races I've ever been able to see. I agree with you. Beautiful. Well, that was your third Olympics. You swam in 2000, 2004 with kind of really no fanfare. You know, you were just another guy representing Serbia, swimming at the Olympics, and then 2008 you got your big moment to shine, and you came back in 2012, made the Olympic final. Not many people get that opportunity to make 4 Olympics. When you were just starting out as a swimmer, very young, growing up in Southern California, at what point did you start to think, I want to be an Olympian?
I think at the age of 12 or 13, I started to play with the idea, because I very quickly, around like the age of 11 or 12, I started wanting to race kids that were in the next age group. You know, I was beating the ones in my age group, wanted to race the ones in the next age group. I think a lot of kids nowadays, they fear aging up just because their champs cuts or whatever time standards that they have, they're probably not fast enough for the next age group. But you know, when I turned 13, I was already in the finals with all of my peers, and I think at the age of 13 or 14, I started swimming in senior level races at meets like the Grand Challenge in Irvine. So, you know, little by little, you start seeing these big names in the local meets that you're in, and you're racing them, and you're like, you know what, like these guys have at least 6, 7, 8 years on me, and look at me, I'm racing with them. Well, maybe when I'm their age, you know, I'll be in a much different place, you know. So little things start to, you know, pop up, and these ideas of like, man, like I think I could hang with these guys. Yeah, so I think around like 13ish started dreaming.
Interesting. And as I said, you grew up in Southern California. Your parents immigrated to the United States from Serbia. Did your parents, being Serbian and having that Eastern European background from them, influenced your swimming career growing up?
Yeah. People that came from Eastern Europe, many of them come from communist countries. And Yugoslavia is what Serbia once was before the war. You know, Yugoslavia was actually a socialist country with a dictator, and you know, and growing up in those surroundings and in much different surroundings, you know, they immigrated to the States, and of course, you know, the way they thought and the way they viewed the world was much different than American people. So, you know, and as such, being raised, my brother and I definitely had it a whole lot different. You know, not to knock on kids nowadays, but we didn't get anything in our lives. You know, like everything had to be earned. And I just remembered that, you know, when we didn't do well, you know, all that was measured was you know, medals and our results. And for us, you know, to kind of blow past just kind of my early childhood, I mean, it comes to the point to where, you know, I went to the Olympic final, or the semifinals in 2004 at the age of 20. And my suit opened up. You know, we had the body suits, and my suit opened up at the 50-meter mark. You know, my turn, this water went in my suit, and I went from first to last in the best part of my race, which is underwater. So everyone knew that there was something wrong, but, you know, I ended up being 10th overall after those semis. And I remember my father, he didn't talk to me for about 4 months. Just disappointment. You know, he was disappointed in me that I blew it. And growing up with this Eastern European background, my experience was different than a lot of kids was I never got coddled, or I never got hugged, or I never got anything. I always got the truth. You either screwed this up, or you blew it, or you're not my son. And it's a very, very hard psychological way to go about in your childhood. You know, I'll admit, like that was one of my complexes, you know, like growing up, like nothing was ever enough. And I wouldn't recommend it to any parents listening, but a lot of people such as Tiger Woods, Andre Agassi, back then the tennis player, their fathers had filmed biographies, and that's how they spoke, how they raised their children. And likewise, you know, my father, he took a play out of their playbook, and that's how I was raised. It was hard. It was hard. So growing up, I felt like my experience was a whole lot different. There's the carrot and then there's a stick. I kind of felt like we got the stick most times. It wasn't ever a physical stick, but it was a stick in every other sense of that term. So, when I would race, for the longest time I would race thinking, hey, this is what I want. I need to do just enough just to make this man happy. And it was never enough. So, growing up, I didn't much like swimming all up until I was able to leave home and go to college and then finally kind of swim for myself. So yeah, a tough upbringing, but in hindsight and looking at my career, nobody can necessarily say that he was wrong, right? And that kind of bugs me.
So with this certain upbringing, and you've mentioned Stephen Prefontaine many times, did you have any other idols or any other people you kind of looked up to when you were that age, like when you're going through that time?
Hey, that's a really good question. Growing up, my idols were, early on, my earliest swimming idols were Alex Popov. And I was too young to really know who he was, but one thing that you could see from an airplane, you can just see how clean and how smooth his stroke, just the efficiency, like the big kick. And I always just kind of thought like this guy is different. I want to swim like them. I want to swim like him. I want to plant my hand and have no bubbles carried with my hand as it enters the water. I mean, I thought about that a lot. Later on, because as I grew more into a butterflyer, I started really admiring Michael Klim. And, just watching him race, I remember this guy. He was with Alex Popov's coach, Gennady. And I remember he was the first guy to ever implement a dolphin kick in the last 15 meters of his 100 freestyle race. So I started doing everything that this guy was doing. And a lot of the reasons why he started to implement these butterfly kicks instead of the freestyle kick in this 100 freestyle, especially at the end, was just to kind of drive that arm forward with every catch as you started getting tired. So I would say that it was definitely Popov and Klim growing up.
Can't beat those. Those are really big idols. But I would imagine you were idolized at some point, especially in 2002 when Swimming World Magazine named you the Boys High School Swimmer of the Year based on your amazing performances that you were doing. I remember at the time I was getting Swimming World Magazine and got the cover, and I was instantly like, who is this kid? And I read about it and I was one of those people who was like, okay, I hope he does really well. What did it mean to you to be awarded that honor of Boys High School Swimmer of the Year?
Hey, so again, just a little background. Like I grew up within the Irvine Nova Aquatics system. Dave Salo was, he was the guy. He was the man. He's the man over there now. After USC. But one of the coolest things about my experience as a kid was there was always a lot of high level athletes coming through our program, and one of those that were my age was Aaron Pearsall. So being the same age as Aaron, or at least the same year, he's actually a year older. We were always kind of competing to see who's the alpha. We swam different races, but still, who was the guy making the biggest waves. And I remember being named Swimmer of the Year, and I was just like, oh, I got one on Aaron, and it was because I beat him in the 100 backstroke at the California State Championship, which is CIF. So that made him pretty upset. And I was like, hey man, hundreds are just not your bag. And he's like, yeah, but I want it to be my bag. So he made it his bag. But yeah, I loved that title, but I hated the photo. If you can ever look up the photo, type in Michael Cavic Swimming World. People call me Mike back then just because, growing up, I was bullied. I had a different name. Milorad is not a common name in the United States. So I was like, you know what, let's just Americanize it and just go with Michael. But yeah, I had this chili bowl haircut, this perfect line going across my forehead with my haircut, and I was not proud of that. But yeah, other than that, back then, receiving a Swimming World magazine was a pretty big deal. And then seeing your name in Swimming World that's how you kind of knew you made it.
Just kind of tying this around again, I would imagine that was something that your father was really proud to see.
I I would like to think so. Um, it's not to bash the guy. He had a very different upbringing, and it took me many years to kind of realize that this was never his intent. Every parent wants what's best for their children. The truth is, as a parent today, I've got no idea what's best. All I can do is just do my best. And many years later, I kind of recognize this is just kind of who he is, and this is his upbringing. This is his operating system that never upgraded. And yeah, I mean, when I was 18 years old or 19 years old, I set my first world record, and people would congratulate him, for my job well done, and he would just look at them and he'd be like, I know what I paid for. All those lessons, all those mornings that I drove him to practice, all of everything, it was about time that he finally did it. So, it's kind of a hard way to go, but I can't imagine how I may have turned out if 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 I had been coddled. I don't know. I think having a chip on your shoulder is advantageous, but also knowing that everything's going to be all right no matter what happens, it's important too.
Right, right. And I think that's a big thing is things have turned out well for you. I mean, you did have a lot of success in the pool and continue to have success out of the pool. So yeah, we can look back. We can always look back and say there are moments that we wish didn't happen in our lives, but they led us to this particular moment where we are. So in hindsight, it wasn't all that bad.
Yeah, I mean, definitely can say that, but then what statistics don't show or what people don't see is all the people that had a similar experience and that just burned out or quit or I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. But that is kind of that Soviet or socialist system where he who survives is going to be champion, right?
Yeah.
So there are pros and cons to everything, and it was definitely different. But I think I wouldn't have done well if I was coddled.
Interesting. Well, as I said, you've done very well for yourself. After you retired from the sport, you pretty much almost immediately got into coaching, and you've been doing that very well for the past decade or so. You're now up in Seattle at King Aquatic. Why did you want to be a coach, and what does it mean for you now to be one of the guiding hands for the current generation of swimmers?
Going to Cal, I studied international political economics, thinking that one day I was going to go into diplomacy. While living in Serbia, it's a much different place. Politics are not as transparent. You think that this regime or even American politics isn't transparent. Well, out there, it's a whole lot harder. And injustices and it's just, you see it every day, and it bothered me. And I realized pretty quickly when I was out there that, I'm not a very good liar, and I don't feel good about selling smoke. And for me, I always knew that I was going to serve people in one way or another. And, I first thought, okay, well, after my career, during my career, I was making some money, and after my career, I thought, well, you know what, like I'm going to go into sales and continue making some money because, you gotta keep living the life. But when I was in it, I just didn't like who I was. I wasn't serving people. And my old boss would say I actually was serving people, but, I didn't feel it. With swimming and coaching, what I realized just the beauty of coaching people, of seeing them through a path that I've already been through. I know the ins and outs of that path. I know what it feels like to go to your age group, championship. I know what it's like every single step of the way. And for me, when I close my eyes and I see and I see myself helping somebody on their path and toward their dreams, I just feel really, really good. And and seeing them accomplish something that they weren't able to accomplish before, you would kind of help them along. It's very, very gratifying. So as a coach, I get to stay in the sport, but I can still, in some odd way, not that I miss my career, but in some way I kind of experience the race through them. I see them and I think to myself, well, if I had their skill set, their characteristics, what would I have done? And that's probably the wrong way to think about it, because not everybody thinks like myself, but it's still very much a game. And because I know all the hoops and holes that lay ahead, I'm excited to serve them and to help them along.
So the ultimate goal for most swimmers, if not all of swimmers, is to go to the Olympics. And you've been there and you've done that. Now you're coaching. So how have those experiences of you competing at the highest level, how has that transformed or kind of influenced the methods and ways that you teach and coach your swimmers now?
Molly, that I was knocked a couple of times by some parents that believed that I was coaching and I coached in the style to prepare people for that ultimate goal, which you kind of talk about, which is going to the Olympics. When I look at things in hindsight, like a buddy of mine that I swam with, he was inducted to his country's Hall of Fame, and basically what he says is people, they look at these careers and they think that it was glorious, when in reality it was just getting beat up day in and day out toward this goal, right? When I coach my athletes, and what this parent was thinking was, that was kind of criticizing for, was I never once told anybody that the ultimate goal is the Olympics. My ultimate goal was to go to the Olympics, but for other people, it's not everybody's goal, because different people have different aspirations. People would like to go to the Olympics, but not everybody is ready or prepared to pay that price. And that price is sacrifice, sacrificing, hanging out with your friends, sacrificing sometimes family time, not going to church sometimes, it's different sacrifices. So a lot of people, they talk about, they talk about what it is that they want. And with my athletes, I kind of start with that. It's like, well, what would you like? And very often, more often than not, I hear a lot of people saying, I want to go to Stanford, I want to go to Cal. It's like, well, okay, that's what everybody says. But let's look at what the athletes that are going to Cal, or going to a Stanford, or going to whatever school, what is it that they're doing? And are you ready to pay that price, or to do what they're doing so that you can get there? And it kind of gets people to sit back sometimes and think, like, like, I don't like to do morning workouts. Well, you know what? Sometimes, doing morning workouts or stretching before and after practice, it's just what you got to do. So, in coaching my athletes, I just kind of like to sit back and, we form a group goal and a team goal, but mostly a group goal. And those are the goals of the group. But then individually, I kind of talk to them. It's like, well, what is the hero of your story going to say? What is it that people want to remember you, John? What is it that people want to remember you, Isaac, about? And we kind of start from there, and we work backwards. What is it you want? And then we kind of build out a plan, like, well, what do you think that you need to do to get to this point? And once they kind of write that out, I'm like, well, I can tell you that the athletes accomplishing these goals are probably doing X, whatever you said, plus X, Y, and Z. So I never make it about going to the Olympics, but becoming the best you can be, just because I think that this sport, Molly, it's a sport, but more importantly, what very few people realize, until the end, is that this sport, it's a teacher. You fall, or you make a mistake, or you don't make that cut. and you can look at it as a disappointment, or you can look at it as an opportunity to kind of like, well, what do I need to do better? But to do this better, I need to evolve. How much are you willing to evolve? That is kind of the big question, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And these are some lucky kids to have you as their coach. I can tell you that. Very,
Oh.
very lucky kids.
It depends who you ask.
Probably right. Yeah. Well, Milo, it's been an absolute pleasure learning more about your journey. Thank you so much for joining us today, and best of luck with everything that continues forward with you on your path.
Hey, thank you, Jeff and Molly. Have a wonderful day and good luck.
Yeah, have a good one. Thank you so much.
No problem.
And we
Bye-bye.
just want to thank you all for joining us. And just one quick reminder, the journey is just as fun as the destination.